In this story, we descend into the brutal world of the Totenkopf Division's tank battles of 1944, a series of horrific and desperate engagements fought on the blood-soaked plains of the Eastern Front. This is the complete and true account of their armoured warfare. From deadly ambushes and burned-out crews to forgotten fields littered with shattered machines and frozen corpses. These are the stories few know, and fewer dare to tell. Raw, violent, and relentlessly human. This is their war. Before we begin, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. A lot of time and effort goes into researching and bringing these forgotten stories to life, and your support truly means a lot. Thank you for being here. As dusk settled over Novo-Ukrainka on the 13th, the final prayers were said over the grave of Balta. With the burial complete, command of the battered Tiger Company passed to SS Untersturmführer Neff. The company had been hastily loaded for transport that evening, their heavy Tigers and their weary crews rattling into position aboard flat cars under the darkening sky. At precisely 2000 hours, the train rumbled eastward toward Krivoje Ozero. The men sat in silence, watching the moonlight blur past the small station buildings and frozen countryside. The war was far from over, and they could feel its grip tightening with every mile. As elements of the Totenkopf Division neared the vicinity of Balta, the company was set to disembark at Savronka, but delays and logistical confusion meant that the train carrying the Tiger unit wouldn't arrive in Pomochnaya until the following day, the 14th. Just as the men began to unload their gear, the whine of Soviet aircraft echoed overhead. Within seconds, bombs rained down on the rail yard. The blast waves tore through the area, wounding several soldiers and sending others scrambling for cover beneath the tracks and wrecked wagons. The smell of smoke and scorched timber lingered long after the aircraft vanished. Meanwhile, 12 trucks from the company had already departed Novo-Ukrainka by road, attempting to rendezvous with the rest of the unit. The roads were in miserable condition, clogged with thawing mud and the wreckage of abandoned vehicles. Roughly 40 kilometers into their journey, several trucks sank into the muck and became immobile. It was SS Rottenführer Kurt Heller who saved the day, skillfully maneuvering an 18-ton prime mover to drag each stuck vehicle to solid ground. His determination and grit were noted by all, and in the days to follow, he was officially commended for his efforts. The column eventually regrouped in Perwomesk, cold, exhausted, but intact. On the 15th, the company received sudden orders diverting them to Balta, and by the 16th, they were finally unloaded and deployed. There was little rest to be found. On the 18th of March, Totenkopf's tank regiment assembled west of Balta, but some of the division's wheeled support elements still hadn't made it through the mire of chaos clogging the southern roads. By the 19th, SS Panzer Regiment 3 had advanced into Paraima, where it launched a coordinated counterattack alongside SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment 6 Eike near the settlement of Lubomirka. The fighting there was fierce and close quarters. Soviet troops had begun pouring across the Bug River in force, bringing with them waves of infantry, self-propelled guns, and Katyusha rockets that screamed across the sky like banshees. By the 22nd, the Russians launched a powerful offensive from Perwomesk, smashing through the German lines and forcing Totenkopf to fall back behind the Bug. 2 days later, on the 24th, Soviet infantry swarmed Lesnechevka, pressing the attack hard against Totenkopf's thinly held front. The Germans, unable to hold the village, were forced to retreat northward to the defensive outskirts of Balta. It was there that Kampfgruppe Pichelis, reinforced by 2 of the remaining Tigers, executed a brave rearguard action. Their heavy guns roared as they covered the withdrawal of comrades, knocking out several Soviet vehicles and buying precious time. But the Russians kept coming. The 26th Guards Rifle Corps later claimed they had destroyed 2 German armoured half-tracks and 1 self-propelled gun in the day's combat. Yet it was the next day, the 25th, that saw Kampfgruppe Pichelis go on the offensive. Positioned on the eastern edge of Balta, they launched a sudden counterattack that pushed Soviet troops back toward Bensari, a rare moment of regained initiative amid the retreat. Realizing the situation was deteriorating beyond recovery, Neff gave the order that day to evacuate all non-essential personnel. The company's repair platoon, maintenance team, and 7 Tigers needing servicing were to be transported south by rail. Their destination, Romania. The evacuation route took them through Kotausk and the tiny village of Weselý Kút before reaching Rozdilna. Meanwhile, another transport carrying a single operational Tiger, a Befehlspanzer III, and a Panzerbeobachtungswagen managed to break through the lines and arrive in Romania on the 2nd of April. Neff himself remained behind with a small detachment, 3 operational Tigers under the command of himself, SS Oberscharführer Weidner and SS Oberscharführer Tonges. This last unit was dubbed Panzergruppe Neff. The remainder of the company, now numbering barely 20 men, dispersed and continued fighting as infantry alongside scattered Wehrmacht formations. They would soon become ghosts in the storm, moving westward in the chaos of collapsing fronts. On the 26th of March, the Soviets launched a brutal assault on Balta's southern perimeter. The defenders held fast. Later that evening, another wave hit the town's northwestern flank. A hastily formed German Kampfgruppe counterattacked at 1800 hours from the northern edge. Just 200 men and 3 Tigers charging headlong into the Soviet advance. The fighting was vicious and costly. Soviet records claimed that the 81st Guards Rifle Regiment of the 25th Guards Rifle Division succeeded in capturing 1 Tiger tank intact, a rare and valuable prize. All around Balta, German vehicle columns attempted to flee the tightening Soviet noose. The roads were choked with lorries, carts, and tracked vehicles. The rail line to Kotausk, crucial for the evacuation of equipment and men, was briefly lost to the Russians, who severed the escape route and claimed to have captured a train carrying 3 tanks. Other reports mentioned the destruction of at least 3 armoured vehicles and multiple SPWs. The situation had deteriorated into a full-blown rout, but even in retreat, the men of Totenkopf and Panzergruppe Neff fought on, tank crews reduced to foot soldiers, their Tigers running low on fuel, but not on defiance. The fields around Balta would soon be littered with twisted steel and scorched earth, a bitter reminder of a division that refused to vanish quietly. On the morning of the 27th, Soviet infantry surged into the heart of Balta, sweeping through the town centre and capturing the main rail station. The area had been hastily abandoned by Totenkopf's rear elements. As the Red Army pushed into the rail yards, they discovered a fully loaded transport train, 5 German tanks and 2 Hummel self-propelled artillery guns from the 1st Battalion of SS Panzer Artillery Regiment 3, all left behind in the scramble to evacuate. Further north, in the outskirts of the town, Soviet units stumbled upon 4 more tanks and 8 trucks, all deserted, not due to damage, but due to one unforgiving fact: there was simply no fuel left to move them. Later in the day, 1 Tiger was knocked out by direct fire from a well-positioned Soviet anti-tank gun. That loss left only 2 operational Tigers in the entire sector, still under the command of Neff and Weidner. With their backs against the wall, the pair manoeuvred their steel giants back into defensive positions in Balta's southern industrial district. On the 28th, a series of German counterattacks was launched from Balta's second rail station, with the goal of halting the Soviet advance toward Perelty and Poszaisley. These were desperate efforts, largely conducted without the support of armour. The once proud Tiger detachment was down to 2 machines, too few to influence the broader battlefield. Yet, the resistance held, for now. On the 29th, another local counterattack was attempted to the south of Balta, but it was clear that the initiative had slipped completely from German hands. Soviet forces overran large portions of the area that day and reported the capture of immense amounts of German equipment. According to the 94th Guards Rifle Division and the 26th Guards Rifle Corps, they had recovered at least 21 self-propelled guns of various types and no fewer than 30 tanks, none of them in running condition. The Germans were abandoning their armour wholesale, and the Red Army was swallowing up the remnants. By the 30th, the southern suburbs of Balta were being cleared methodically by Soviet forward units. Among the wreckage, they located another abandoned Tiger, out of fuel and left behind by its crew. Nearby, Just 1 kilometer south of the main rail station, a major discovery was made: a rail convoy loaded with 22 tanks from the 2nd Battalion of SS Panzer Regiment 3. The train had never departed. It sat silent, fully loaded, now firmly in Soviet hands. That same day, what was left of the tank group from SS Panzer Regiment 3 managed to reach Kotausk. They quickly loaded the last of their machines onto flat cars and began the withdrawal route via Weselý Kut and Razdelnaya. Those men without armour, drivers, radio operators, and maintenance crews, moved eastward on foot and truck, following the remnants of Totenkopf toward Dubosery. But the Red Army was not far behind. On the 31st, Soviet forces captured Kotausk by 0700 hours and reported finding a rail transport still waiting on the platform, loaded with 3 German tanks and 4 assault guns. Totenkopf, fighting for every mile, threw together a hasty blocking position on both sides of the road near Jelisowiecka, trying to stall the Soviet pursuit. Meanwhile, the core of the division continued withdrawing southeast, reassembling in Dubosery, and later reaching the Romanian city of Chisinau. It was there that the men would regroup, bloodied but alive. During the final days of March, the last 3 operational Panzer IVs from the 2nd Battalion were lost, one to breakdown, the others during skirmishes. Totenkopf's withdrawal had become a logistical disaster. In Balta alone, the division had to abandon around 1,000 wheeled vehicles, an almost unthinkable loss in both material and mobility. The 9th Company, now without any tanks at all, arrived in Dubosery on the 2nd of April. By the 3rd, they reached Chisinau, where the company spent several days recovering, licking their wounds, and awaiting orders. They remained in the city until the 10th, when the company was moved to Lapusna. One day later, on the 11th, the men were gathered again near the town of Negresty. By the 12th of April, what was left of Totenkopf began to concentrate in the Husi-Vaslui-Krasna region. The goal was to reconstitute the division and load for rail transport towards central Romania, specifically the towns of Bacău and Roman. Requests for transport were made with urgency, yet to the frustration of the staff officers coordinating the move, the Romanian rail authorities appeared sluggish in responding. For a division that had just survived a chaotic retreat across the southern front, any delay now felt like betrayal. Nonetheless, elements of SS Panzer Regiment 3 began assembling in Krasna on the 12th. The first transport train finally departed on the 13th, slow, overloaded, but moving. It marked the end of Totenkopf's campaign in Ukraine, a retreat marked not by glorious combat victories, but by survival, loss, and the bitter memory of what once was. On the 2nd of April, 1944, the grim pace of retreat came to a grinding halt in the small town of Rozdilna. The transport carrying the last 7 Tigers from 9th Company, along with 30 other overloaded rail convoys, sat idle on the single line leading south toward Tiraspol. The bottleneck was absolute. Every available rail car from every corner of the crumbling southern front had converged here, trapped like animals in a narrowing cage. The Red Army was closing fast. It was there on the cracked platform of Rozdilna's rail station that SS Untersturmführer Neff was approached by a general staff officer. The order was direct and devastating: destroy the remaining Tigers. There would be no saving them. The Soviets were simply too close. For Neff and his men, the last hope of preserving their precious machines evaporated in an instant. Erich Lemkuhl would later recall that bleak moment. The tank regiment remnants had been loaded for transport toward Tiraspol when the order came down. Hopes that the Tiger-carrying train might be prioritized were dashed as they were instructed to sabotage their own armor. It was a symbolic death knell for the battered company. Forced to abandon their tanks, the crews gathered what rations they could scavenge from the surrounding transports. Ammunition was rationed, weapons were checked. Then, burdened with full field gear, the men turned westward on foot, the cold wind of early spring snapping at their collars. But the elements soon turned hostile. A brutal snowstorm swept across the flat Ukrainian steppe, blanketing the roads and cutting visibility to almost nothing. The march devolved into a miserable slog, packs heavy, boots frozen, nerves frayed. As they stumbled past dozens of vehicles mired in the mud, some had to be destroyed with grenades to deny them to the enemy. Every step westward was a fight against exhaustion, against the weather, and against time itself. At night, the men collapsed into barns or curled up beneath haystacks, rifles clutched tightly, nerves strung taut. The fear of encirclement was constant. It was during one of these restless nights that a small group of Soviet tanks suddenly scattered the column. The Germans opened up with machine gun fire in a short, sharp exchange, buying just enough time to retreat further. Eventually, they reached the city of Tiraspol. There, amid the chaos, military police were assembling disorganized units into emergency formations. Lemkul and his group slipped through, luckily spared from being thrown into makeshift infantry Kampfgruppen. At Tiraspol, the 9th Company had set up a temporary reporting center. Those soldiers who made it there were logged, reorganized, and finally transported by rail to Kishinev. From Kishinev, they were shuttled further west, to Bakau. Not all escaped trouble. SS man Werner, a mechanic from the Instandstaffel, was sentenced to 14 days of hard labor after he was caught attempting to trade his service pistol for food. Meanwhile, the 2nd Battalion of SS Panzer Regiment 3 and the Regimental HQ Company arrived in Krasna on the 12th and waited until the 13th to begin loading operations. By the 14th, they too reached Bakau. The division had no tanks left. On the 17th, word came from the army vehicle officer in Kishinev. A fresh shipment of specialist tools for Tiger maintenance had arrived by air and was ready for collection. But there were no Tigers left to maintain. During April, there had been initial plans to reassign the 9th Company to form the new 3rd Company of Schwer SS Panzerabteilung 102. However, Adolf Hitler personally rescinded that order. The company was to remain an integral part of SS Panzer Regiment 3. Eventually, Schwer SS Panzerabteilung 102 would be reinforced by personnel from Abteilung 103 instead. On 14th April, 9th Company arrived in Bakau and was quartered at a hotel in the town centre. After a brief period of recovery, a 50-man tank recovery detachment was organised under the command of Neff. On 1st May, the team was flown via Ju-90 aircraft to Belgrade, where they linked up with rail transport to the central depot at HZA, Magdeburg in Germany. There, 2 transports were loaded with newly built Tiger wine tanks. The first left promptly, and by 6th May had arrived back in Bakau with 4 Tigers aboard. However, due to orders from higher command, the transport was redirected to Roman, where the tanks were unloaded in a swift 2-hour operation. The Tigers were immediately deployed near Targu Frumos, a strategic location facing renewed Soviet attacks. Between the 8th and 10th of May, the 4 Tigers faced a series of low-level airstrikes from Russian ground attack aircraft, yet miraculously, no losses or casualties were sustained. On the 11th, the Tigers were withdrawn briefly to a nearby village for maintenance and resupply. On the 12th, they returned to the front, taking up new positions along the vital Balatati-Jassy-Iashi road. That night, between the 13th and 14th, the unit claimed to have shot down a Soviet night bomber harassing their sector. The 2nd Tiger transport had not fared so smoothly. Severely delayed due to Allied bombing raids that ripped apart the rail network across Siebenbürgen, Transylvania, the train was stranded in the ethnic German village of Gross Schogen, Nagisayo. Successive waves of RAF bombing had devastated the lines, and the rails had to be relayed by hand before the transport could resume. Lemkul recalled spending the Pentecostal festival with the Volksdeutsche villagers as they waited. Finally, on the 19th, the train limped into Bakau and, like the first, was sent on to Roman, where it arrived and unloaded on the 20th. The new Tigers, though late, were immediately put to use in the Iasi-Targu Frumos sector. Another recovery detachment would later return to Germany and bring back 6 more Tigers, completing the slow and painful resurrection of the 9th Company. Though shattered and scattered only weeks earlier, the company was once again clawing its way back to life, scarred, hardened, and ready for the next test of fire. Until the final days of June 1944, the 9th Company remained headquartered in Bakau, clinging to a fragile stability amid the unraveling Eastern Front. But as the German situation across the southern front collapsed further, orders came swiftly. On 7th July, the company was loaded onto rail transports in Roman. The journey would take them through war-torn southern Poland, across Radom and Warsaw, and deep into the contested territories of the east. Their final destination was the area around Osowice, where they were unloaded and deployed for immediate operations in the direction of Grodno. The pace of war allowed no time for rest, but the roots of this movement stretched back weeks earlier. On 31st May, SS Panzer Regiment 3 had assembled a rapid response force near Targu Frumos. This armoured group included 24 Panzer IVs and 2 Tiger tanks. Their mission was to stabilise the front and support Axis positions in the region. Then, on 7th June, 57th Panzer Corps ordered a full Panzergruppe to prepare for combat along the road to Iași. SS Sturmbannführer Lachmann was given command, leading a striking force of 12 Panzerviehs and 8 Tigers, reinforced by the 3 Battalion of SS Panzergrenadier Regiment 5 Totenkopf. At 0200 hours on the 8th, Lachmann's Panzergruppe moved into positions near Podol Iloe, coming under the operational control of the 24th Panzer Division. At the same time, 13 remaining tanks of SS Panzer Regiment 3 were placed in reserve under the command of SS Sturmbannführer Bayermeier, held back for a possible counterstroke should the line break. On the 8th of June, Lachmann's Panzergruppe was engaged near Hill 177.0 and the elevated ridges northwest of Damian. The following day brought renewed action in the same contested sectors. On the 10th, the Tigers and Panzer IVs helped seize Hill 176.0 after heavy resistance and held it until the 11th. The Tigers, their engines strained and crews exhausted, were recalled on the 13th. The Panzer IVs followed suit, returning to divisional command by the 15th. Throughout this action, the Werkstatt Company for SS Panzer Regiment 3 remained hidden in a wooded area 5 kilometers east of Roman, maintaining what machines they could. Meanwhile, on 15th May, a new tank recovery and delivery team of 30 men was dispatched to HZA Magdeburg. They departed Germany 2 days later, bringing with them 6 Tiger tanks that had previously belonged to Schwerer SS Panzerabteilung 103. The train reached Bachau on 31st May. 6 Tigers followed on another transport on 7th June. Though 2 of these were designated for 9th Company, higher orders from Army Group South came down on 11th June. Both Tigers were to be transferred immediately to Panzer Regiment Großdeutschland. That same day, a collection team from Großdeutschland arrived, loaded the tanks, and departed by rail. While the combat arms were being shuffled and reinforced, personnel of 9th Company continued to rotate. On 5th May, SS Untersturmführer Wenzal joined the unit after transferring from the SS Panzer Training and Replacement Regiment in Sennelager. He was placed in command of the 2nd Platoon. Wenzal, a seasoned instructor formerly posted at the Panzer Troop School in Putlos, had been promoted on the 1st of March. The 1st Platoon remained under SS Untersturmführer Hans Krischer, who had joined 9th Company the previous November after completing the inaugural SS Panzer Junker Officer Cadet course. He too was promoted on the 1st of March. The 3rd Platoon, meanwhile, was led by SS Untersturmführer Helmut Neff, who was simultaneously acting as the company's commander. Neff's career had begun in the Luftwaffe in 1937. By 1943, he had transferred to the Waffen-SS, completed officer training, and was commissioned in October. He took his post in the 9th Company on the 1st of November. SS Hauptsturmführer Hans Fischer had been nominated as the company's official commander as early as 20th March 1944. However, bureaucratic delay meant his confirmation didn't arrive until the end of that month. Even then, Fischer didn't formally assume command in person until the 18th of July. In the interim, he was fulfilling other roles, commanding Schwerer SS Panzerabteilung 102 during March. By May, Fischer had returned to Vienna, where his wife was expecting their first child. He remained there through early July, just as the unit prepared to redeploy toward Army Group Center. Coinciding with this move, the last tank recovery and transport team, 25 men led by SS Hauptscharführer Berger, was dispatched on 7th July from Romania to Germany. Their mission, retrieve 5 new Tigers. These machines departed HZA Magdeburg on the 26th of July and arrived in Warsaw on the 31st, just one day before the outbreak of the Polish Home Army uprising. The original plan had been to unload the tanks in Lwow, but war had its own timetable. As July turned to August, 9th Company was once again on the march. After suffering devastating losses, forced evacuations, and logistical chaos in the spring, they now re-emerged, rebuilt with new tanks, hardened officers, and battle-tested resolve. But ahead lay Grodno, Warsaw, and the fury of a dying summer on the Eastern Front. During May 1944, as the Eastern Front raged further north, the support elements of 9th Company remained behind in Bacău, providing essential services and keeping the logistical framework intact. The only significant structural change to the unit came with the integration of the company's maintenance platoon into the regiment's central Werkstatt repair company. The remaining support units retained their independence and continued operating effectively. The maintenance section, or Instandstaffel, was under SS Oberscharführer Henke. The recovery platoon, or Bergezug, was led by SS Oberscharführer Bauer, and the supply platoon, or Nachschubzug, continued to handle material logistics. SS Untersturmführer Greisinger was also posted to the regiment as the new technical officer TFK. Meanwhile, 2 high-level Führervorträge, leader conferences in May on the 10th and 11th, resulted in requests from the General Inspector of the Panzer Troops that 9th Company be reinforced to a strength of 125 men and allocated 10 new Tiger tanks. As April gave way to July, SS Panzer Regiment 3 underwent a complex process of refitting and rearming. When the 2nd Battalion unloaded in Bacău on the 14th of April, it had no tanks at all. On 15th April, the 58th Panzer Corps ordered Totenkopf to provide 15 tank crews to train Romanian forces of the 1st Armoured Division Romania Mare on the Panzer IV. These crews temporarily left the regiment, returning on 27th April. Around the same time, the battalion commander, SS Hauptsturmführer Bayermeier, was promoted to SS Sturmbannführer. The first 2 Panzer-Tiefs were delivered on 28th April by Panzer Regiment Großdeutschland and assigned as training tanks to 5th Company. On the 2nd of May, a transport of 34 new Panzer IV-4s, originally destined for the 24th Panzer Division and Panzer Grenadier Division Großdeutschland, arrived in Roman. A Totenkopf collection team from the 6th and 7th Companion was sent to retrieve tanks and succeeded in acquiring 22 as an emergency issue. Another 4 Panzer IVs intended for Großdeutschland were rerouted to Totenkopf on the 20th of May. These tanks were quickly committed to combat. On the 2nd of June, Bayermeier led them into action near Helestieni to support the 2nd Battalion, SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment 6 Eicher, with additional firepower provided by a single battery from Stugee Brigade 325. The next day, the Panzer IV Group engaged Soviet armour 2 kilometers south of Ruginoasa, knocking out 4 tanks in a sharp clash. The fighting continued on the 4th in support of Eicher's Grenadiers. Meanwhile, SS Sturmgeschütze Abteilung 3, the division's assault gun battalion, had begun its own period of rearmament in the village of Parințea under SS Sturmbannführer Pichelis. On 15th April, the battalion was reduced to just 2 Stugies and 2 self-propelled anti-tank guns. That changed rapidly. On 28th April, the battalion received 8 new Stugies from Army Sturmgeschütze Brigade 228, followed by 17 more on 5th May, then 9 additional vehicles on the 6th. By the 8th, another delivery arrived in Roman, and 3 more Stugies were taken over from the 46th Infantry Division on the 10th of June. A final unit was delivered on the 18th. The battalion rejoined frontline operations on the 14th of June. On 1st July, SS Sturmgeschütze Abteilung 3 was restructured and renamed SS Panzerjäger Abteilung 3. The battalion was now a powerful anti-tank formation, equipped with 30 Stugee 3 assault guns, 2 in the headquarters company, 14 in each of the 2nd and 3rd Companion, plus 2 heavy self-propelled anti-tank guns and 4 additional heavy paquet guns in the 1st Company. Elements of the battalion saw combat in May and June. A detachment under SS Obersturmbannführer Müller deployed toward Oberokani on 12th May and later relieved Sturmgeschütze Brigade 228 supporting Romanian Brigade Oprisch. Another Stu-G company with 8 vehicles was sent out on 23rd June to assist the Romanian Guards Brigade and return to division control on 1st July. By early July 1944, SS Panzer Regiment 3 had rebuilt significant strength. On 1st July, it fielded 28 Panzer IVs, 17 Stu-G 3 assault guns, and 15 operational Tigers. Additional reinforcements, 17 more Panzer IVs, 2 Panzerbeobachtungswagen I4s, 5 Tigers, and 4 more Stu-Gs had been earmarked for issue. Simultaneously, the 1st Battalion of the regiment had just completed a major refit and been issued 78 new Panther tanks. 4 more replacement Panthers arrived on 31st July. The 1st Company of SS Panzerjägerabteilung 3, meanwhile, was sent from Poland on the 6th of August for conversion to the Panzerjäger 4. By the 5th of September, it was fully equipped with 21 Jagdpanzer 4s at the Mielau training grounds and rejoined the division 10 days later. Then came the call to move. On the 6th of July, Totenkopf was ordered to redeploy from Romania to Poland. The Soviet juggernaut had just launched Operation Bagration on 22nd June, an enormous offensive by the 1st Baltic and 1st through 3rd Byelorussian fronts that had shattered Army Group Center. Totenkopf would be part of the response. On 7th July, 9th Company was loaded in Roman aboard 2 rail transports, passed through Warsaw, and finally unloaded on the 16th in the village of Osowice. From there, the company assembled in Mieleskowce, southwest of Kuźnica, and came under the command of the 4th Army, AOK-4. By 17th July, 9th Company was assigned to Kampfgruppe Kuhn, one of 2 combat groups tasked with halting a Soviet advance threatening to break through. 3rd Battalion of SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment 6 Eike advanced toward Adamovice with direct support from the Tigers of 9th Company. North of them, near the village of Mickiewicz, elements of a battalion of SS Polizei Regiment 34 took up positions. The mission was clear: crush the Soviet bridgehead near Zarzicach. Fighting erupted throughout the day. 3rd Battalion and the Tigers made progress, but the cost was heavy. In the fighting for Adamovice, the Tiger commanded by SS Untersturmführer Wenzel was struck by Soviet fire and immobilized. Russian soldiers overran the vehicle, dragged out the crew and executed them on the spot. Only the radio operator, SS Rottenführer Heinz Rudolf, was spared and taken prisoner. The rest, Wenzel, driver SS Unterscharführer Siebenaler, gunner SS Sturmann Lau, and loader SS Sturmann Metzger, were murdered. As the sun fell that evening, I Battalion of Polizei Regiment 34 entered Mickiewicz. The front held for now, but the brutality of the campaign in Poland had begun. For the 9th Company, the war was again becoming intimate, merciless, and face-to-face. The heat hung heavy over Kilbaski on the morning of July 18th, the sky thick with smoke and low cloud, the kind of oppressive silence that only came before artillery fire. In the shattered remnants of the front near Adamovice, the Soviets were pushing hard, pounding Hill 67 with everything they had. The German grenadiers of the 3rd Battalion, SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment 6, Eike, had been fighting tooth and nail for days, but the line was collapsing and the withdrawal had already begun. Korps von Gottberg was pulling back, and the whole sector was on the verge of falling apart. Kampfgruppe Kuhn, desperate to stop the Soviets from spilling through, threw everything it had into the fight. Reinforcements were sent to support the Polizei Regiment at Adamovice. The Tigers of 9th Company rolled forward through the ruined village roads, the air already thick with the oily smoke of burning thatch and scorched timber. The ground trembled beneath them, engine noise, explosions in the distance, and with them came the low, calm voice of SS Hauptsturmführer Hans Fischer, stern, experienced and respected, even if he'd only recently taken command. Near Kilbaski, the Tigers found their positions, guns aligned toward Adamovice's eastern edge. Behind them, 15 Stu-Gs moved with Polizei infantry, preparing to sweep the village once more. Somewhere ahead, Schultz's Tiger had broken down. stuck in the middle of the village, surrounded by flames and enemy fire. A flare had gone up earlier. Radio contact confirmed he was still alive, but he wasn't going to be for long without help. Without hesitation, Fischer mounted his own Tiger and gave the order to move. Dust billowed behind them as they pushed toward Schultz's position. They found him stranded in the smoke, sitting motionless amid the crumbling village homes, fire licking at the fences nearby. Hooking up a tow cable, Fischer's crew began the slow crawl back toward the German line. The cables strained as the massive steel beast behind them groaned forward. That's when the first shell hit. There was no warning, no signal, no Soviet aircraft overhead, just the deafening crack of a shell slamming into the barrel of Schultz's Tiger. Then the next round came screaming in, slamming hard into Fischer's vehicle, striking it high, right near the commander's hatch. Fischer had been standing halfway up, trying to secure the open hatch in case more rounds followed. He didn't have time to duck. The shot tore through him. The driver, Szkiot, was wounded. The crew went into emergency mode. The Tiger shuddered to a halt. Inside the tank, panic met discipline. The driver fired a red flare out of the hatch, a ceasefire flare. Moments later, the shooting stopped. Silence fell. And then came the awful realization. The fire hadn't come from the enemy at all. It was an anti-tank gun belonging to SS Polizei Regiment 34. A misidentification. A mistake. A fatal one. By the time the Tiger limped back to friendly lines, Fischer was barely breathing. He died 2 days later in Loiki. The gun crew that had fired the fatal shot stood there, pale and shaken, as the blackened Tiger rolled past. Their commander lowered his binoculars and cursed under his breath. No apology would bring Fischer back. With Fischer gone, command of the company passed to SS Hauptsturmführer Neidhardt, a hardened officer transferred in from 7th Company. But there was no time to mourn. The Soviets weren't slowing down. On the 19th of July, the company rolled towards Sopocini alongside recon elements of SS Panzer Aufklärungsabteilung 3. It was supposed to be a swift strike, but they were met with withering defensive fire. Mortars rained down, and the air above the hedgerows buzzed with the sound of low-flying aircraft. Picelli's, now leading the Panzerjäger units, was also in the area, trying to coordinate the assault. In the chaos of the engagement, SS Sturmmann Heinz Bartel was killed by a bomb blast that flipped his vehicle like a tin can. Josef Hodap from the maintenance team took shrapnel in the leg and was dragged out under fire. SS Untersturmführer Krischer was hit too, just a graze, but enough to soak his tunic in blood. On the 20th, the company stayed near Kilbaski. That morning, German infantry launched a counterattack into Adamovice, trying to recover ground lost the day before. Incredibly, they reached Wenzel's wrecked Tiger, the one captured by the Russians. Its crew had been executed days earlier, but the machine remained. The Germans soaked the inside with petrol and lit it up, sending a plume of smoke into the sky as the Tiger burned, a funeral pyre for its fallen crew. On the 21st, the Soviets came again. A wave of Su-85s charged toward Mankowiec. 9th Company was waiting. The Tigers held their ground and fired volley after volley, the 88mm rounds finding their mark. Several Soviet guns were turned into smouldering metal. That evening, pressure shifted toward Silvanovic. Grenadiers from Aika struggled to hold the line near Vasilovich and Novosadi. 3 separate Soviet assaults battered their positions. Neidhardt's Tigers were dispatched again, supporting first, then counter-attacking through the night alongside both battalions of Grenadier Regiment 6. It was chaos, short gains, bloody repulses. In the end they held, but only just. On the 23rd, Neff, recently recovered from wounds, was summoned to division headquarters. Orders were clear. 9th Company was being transferred from AOK 4 to AOK 2, redeployment to the Siedlce area by rail. But the fighting hadn't finished with them yet. 4 Tigers were sent to Osowiec to begin loading, but only 3 rail flat cars could be found. 1 Tiger was left behind and would have to wait until August 3rd to move. The 3 Tigers reached Sokolow by the evening of the 25th. 1 rolled into Siedlce just before 8 p.m. The others departed again late into the night. By the 26th, 5 Tigers were still fighting east of Dabrowa with the 3rd Battalion. Soviet armor pressed from the tree lines, and the Tigers held them off until orders came through for full withdrawal. By the 28th, the Werkstatt unit was loading 2 damaged Tigers at Osowiec for transport. In total, 15 flat cars were needed just for the crippled machines and stewgees alone. On the 29th at dawn, 5 Tigers were loaded and sent to Sokolo, arriving the following day. Another 3 Tigers were dispatched but had to be diverted to Warsaw due to enemy activity. They arrived on the 31st, just as 5 brand new Tigers from Magdeburg rolled into Warsaw Praga. SS Hauptscharführer Berger took charge of the new arrivals and was instructed to move them to the Staufer Kaserne. Reinforcements had arrived just in time. On that same day, 31st July, a Tiger commander wrote a few lines in his logbook from Siedlci. Our Tiger turns on the spot and fires toward the end of the street. On our right is the railway embankment. The barrel roars, an 88-round downrange. The turret fills with smoke. We open the hatch, coughing. Holtorf is behind me. He lines up another target, fires. A T-34 bursts into flame. The crew bail out, screaming. The retreat continued. The Panthers of I Battalion and the Tigers of 9th Company pulled back west, then swung north through Chodo, Kopsy, and eventually regrouped around Suchdol. By the 3rd of August, 2 Tigers were fighting near Banacza-Wisna, supporting I Battalion against Soviet III Tank Corps. The Panthers counterattacked along the Kolno-Zambraniak road. That same day, 2 more Tigers joined a push into Stawiska. On the 4th, they were fighting again near Arkuniew. Even Panther companies from Division Viking were being thrown into the fire near Chobota and Mrowiaska. On the 5th, the company regrouped near Lesna Gora, 25 kilometers east of Stanisław, where they supported the 2nd and 3rd Battalions of Ike Regiment. 3 T-34s were knocked out in the encounter, though 1 Tiger took a hit that forced it into repair. For the first time in weeks, the 6th and 7th of August passed without combat, a rare moment of silence. The men cleaned their tanks, rebandaged wounds, sharpened knives, and watched the horizon. But by the 8th, the calm had ended. The Tigers were ordered west, toward Gozdyówka. The front was moving again, and once again, 9th Company was going with it. The early morning haze on the 19th of July hung low over the Polish fields around Krusha. Rain had passed through the night before, leaving the ground damp, the air heavy, and nerves on edge. The clanking of treads rolled across the quiet terrain as the Tigers of 9th Company moved out alongside the Panthers of 1st Battalion, SS Panzer Regiment 3. Their task that day was simple in word, brutal in execution: break through a Soviet anti-tank gun line east of Wola Roszczep. 1st Company and 9th Company pushed forward in unison, engines growling, each man inside the tanks gritting his teeth against the tension rising in his chest. The opening attack was swift and violent. The anti-tank front cracked under pressure, the guns silenced one after another, but the cost came fast. 1 Panther had its main gun hit and disabled, others suffered superficial damage. Crews emerged shaken but alive, and for a brief moment the way ahead looked clear. But that silence was broken again. Soviet armor had been spotted, heavy tanks lurking in the woods southeast of Krusa. Orders were given. Once more, the Panthers and Tigers rolled forward, this time across open ground. The terrain offered little mercy. Ahead, just 1,000 meters in the distance, JS-2 tanks of the 62nd Heavy Guards Tank Regiment waited in ambush, their massive 122mm guns poised like hammers. The 1st Panther erupted in a blast of fire and twisted steel. The crew never stood a chance. A 2nd SS Obersturmbannführer Schramm's vehicle took hit after hit. The track shredded, the hull cracked open. It ground to a halt, wounded but intact enough to be recovered. Then the Tigers took the brunt. SS Untersturmführer Neff's Tiger was hit and immobilized. The crew bailed out under fire. Another Tiger, Sandler's, suffered damage and was later abandoned. The worst blow came to SS Oberscharführer Weidner. His Tiger took a direct hit. There were no survivors. Radio operator SS Sturman Schmidt, driver SS Sturman Meyer, and Weidner himself were killed in the burning wreck. The company had taken a brutal beating. That afternoon, the counterattacks resumed. Fewer tanks, more caution. But this time, the Tigers struck back. One JS-2 was destroyed outright, and 2 more were disabled and left smoldering in the field. Meanwhile, tanks from SS Panzer Regiment 5 launched a strike on Kozli, taking some pressure off the men still engaged near Krusha. By nightfall, the 4th SS Panzer Corps reported 21 Soviet tanks and self-propelled guns destroyed across the day's fighting. But the Russians too made their claims, 2 Tigers and 18 Panthers knocked out. The 8th Guards Tank Corps lost 2 Shermans and an Su-76, while another 9 Shermans and 2 more self-propelled guns were damaged and sent for repair. The fields around Krusha were a graveyard of machines, blackened hulls and twisted wreckage scattered across the Polish soil. On the following day, the 20th of July, the 62nd Heavy Guards Tank Regiment gained control of Krusha's left flank. But by the 22nd, the Tigers of 9th Company surged forward once more and knocked out 4 Sherman tanks in the area, momentarily halting the advance. Erich Lemkuhl would never forget those days. The loss of Weitner haunted the company. His Tiger had gone up in smoke. The crew hadn't made it out. Neff's Tiger had also been struck, the crew bailing out as flames licked around the turret. Several other Tigers were lost in fierce counterattacks near Radzimin and Pustelnik. One loader, Boxleitner, was killed by friendly fire. The constant Soviet shelling left sleep impossible, and at times sanity felt far away. Near Radzimin, Neidhart stood surveying the terrain, binoculars to his eyes, when a Soviet grenade landed nearby. He was wounded, his loyal dog killed by the blast. Command of the company passed to Neff once more. Krischer was wounded again, lightly, but enough to sideline him. SS Sturmen Berg also took shrapnel. Orders came to fall back to Yosefov. The high ground there, Hill 104 near Rembelschizna, was vital. The Russians had seized it. Late in the day, the Tigers of 9th Company, alongside a battalion of Stooges, moved to retake it. As they advanced, a T-34 blocked their route. At just 50 meters, a Tiger fired, shattering the Soviet tank in a single flash. But the Russians were ready. At dawn, artillery began pounding them from the direction of Solchu. The sky split open with fire. Shells howled overhead. Trees exploded. A Stug nearby was flung skyward like a toy. Lemkuhl's Tiger was thrown around like it had been kicked by a god. For 30 minutes they sat shaken in silence, crouched inside the tank, listening to the barrage as it slowly crept past. Then came the infantry. Soviet troops emerged across the field in waves, rushing the hill. The Tiger's 88 opened up, joined by its coaxial machine gun. Russian soldiers dropped, but still they came. There was little cover, just torn earth and broken logs. Eventually the Germans had to fall back off the hill. But soon after, their own artillery began screaming in, Nebelwerfers and field guns lighting up the Soviet ranks. With the sky behind them burning, the Tigers advanced again, rolling back up Hill 104 and into the shattered tree line. They fought through a graveyard. The woods were nothing but stumps, shot-up guns, the corpses of horses and men, splintered vehicles. The stench of rot and engine oil hung in the air. Silence returned. Next to Lemkuhl's Tiger, another sat idling. On the other side, 2 Stooges stood like statues. Then came a banging, frantic, desperate, on Lemkuhl's hatch. It was Neff, covered in soot and blood. His Tiger had been hit again. He and his gunner had escaped, but the rest, Loader Mauser, Driver Lusht, and Radioman Low, were dead. Just like that. Gone. There was barely time to recover before the third assault came. The hill, now bare of trees, offered no cover. They pulled back. Turrets turned to the rear as they reversed under fire. A penal battalion of probation infantry had been attached to the Tigers. When ordered to charge the hill, they cowered in ditches. The Tigers moved ahead anyway, but the Soviets were spent, demoralized. No fire came. They took the hill again by default. That night, just before midnight, a radio signal came through. Fall back. They moved to the foot of the hill and into a stretch of woods, where they finally slept inside the hulls of their tanks. Lemkuhl woke at noon to the sound of snoring. He rolled over and froze. Outside the tank, just meters away, stood a group of Russians. Unarmed, wide-eyed, they stood admiring the Tiger. Shouting, they gestured to the machine. Lemkul yelled, waking his crew. The MG fired first. The Russians scattered. Then came a shot from the right. An anti-tank round slammed into the side armor. No penetration. They scanned the area, spotted the muzzle flash, and fired the 88 at point-blank range. The shell blasted apart the hedgerow. Engines roared and they pulled out at full speed, heading back toward German lines. They reached the infantry dug in on Hill 104 just minutes later. It was the closest brush with death they'd had yet. October came. Trenches were dug near Yosifov, bunkers built into the damp soil. During a sudden artillery strike, Lemkul tripped and broke his arm. He was evacuated to a field hospital in Modlin. On the 9th of October, he returned, his arm still aching, but he refused to stay away. By the 10th, the Russians unleashed another major offensive. 1,000 guns stretched across 5 kilometers of front. Yosifov shook like an earthquake. Soviet infantry broke through in some sectors, but the Germans counterattacked and restored their lines by nightfall. On the 12th, Lemkul returned to Nef's Tiger and resumed his duties. Now the company was engaged near Legionovo and Jabłonna, near what they called the Wet Triangle, a swampy, marshy region near the Vistula. The fighting there was fierce. SS Unterscharführer Probst and SS Rottenführer Hodap were both killed near Jabłonna. One of the company cooks, just a young man trying to feed his comrades, was killed by a mortar shell while gathering supplies from a nearby farm. The war was changing. It was no longer about pushing forward or holding lines. It was about endurance, about how long they could last, and who would be left when the fire stopped. The fighting around Radzimin never stopped. It only shifted. On 25th August 1944, the Tigers of 9th Company dug in near Klembu, then pulled toward Krashev and Zawada, just northeast of the ruined town. The heat, the flies, the distant thunder of Russian artillery, all of it had become a constant rhythm. But the men knew something worse was building. On the 26th, disaster struck. Near Klembau, a Russian anti-tank round found its mark. The Tiger of SS Unterscharführer Kronmüller burned. He and his radio operator, SS Rottenführer von Berg, were killed inside. The company's command shifted once again. SS Untersturmführer Neff took over the battered unit, as Neidhart moved to take command of 5th Company. The days that followed were a haze of smoke and retreat. Between 30 and 31 August, the company was holding near Viktorov and Marianov, shattered villages that had become no man's land. The pressure never eased. New names appeared, fresh faces like Gunther Schultz. Others were being disciplined. SS Oberscharführer Wendt, SS Rottenführer Off, and SS Rottenführer Schultz-Berger all served brief terms in the probationary platoon. The strain was showing, discipline was slipping, the lines were cracking. By 1st September, the company had pulled back again, this time towards Struga and Nadma, closer to the defensive high ground of Hill 104. Neidhart, who had only just left 9th Company, was killed while leading 5th Company, another man gone, another command post emptied. The company's strength that day was 88 men, 3 officers, 19 NCOs, 66 other ranks, a skeleton of what it once was. On 2 September, the Tigers fought through the thick woods northwest of Nadma. Some tanks had crossed the Poniatowski Bridge in Warsaw, rolling slowly east after maintenance. On the 6th, the company was posted to security duty in Volka Radziminska. Then came Hill 104 again. Between 12th and 13th September, grenadiers from Eike launched repeated attacks to retake the hill. 9th Company supported them, but it wasn't enough. The Russians held, and on the 13th, SS Unterscharführer Probst's Tiger was destroyed by Soviet artillery. He was killed near Swupno, just one more body in the churn of war. Walter Weber, from 5th Company, later remembered that day near Radzimin. A 2,000-meter gap of open land stretched ahead of them, and beyond it, the Russians were gathering. Trees moved where there were no winds. The barrels of Soviet tanks peeked through the leaves. JS-2S monsters. They listened to intercepted Soviet radio chatter. not understanding the words, but feeling the tension in every syllable. 3 Tigers were with them, crouched behind rubble. Then came the retreat orders. Some Tigers pulled out, the others stayed. Weber and his men watched as JS2s broke from the tree line and thundered forward. The front had shifted again. On the night of 14th to 15th September, after losing Hill 104, 9th Company and the rest of Totenkopf withdrew to new lines around Josefov. The following day, the company was attached to SS Panzerjägerabteilung 3. On 16th September, the Tigers joined grenadiers from 3rd Battalion, Regiment 6, Eiche, and elements of the 2nd Company of Panzerjägerabteilung 3. The objective was clear: support Hungarian troops and hold the southern approaches to Rembelszczyzna. Hill 103 stood in the way. They attacked with force. Tigers led the charge, but during the engagement, SS Untersturmführer Neff's Tiger was struck by artillery. The shell tore through the machine. Neff escaped the hatch, his uniform on fire, but the rest of his crew were lost. SS Rottenführer Kowalski, SS Sturmann Lucht, SS Sturmann Lau, all dead inside the burning tank. Elsewhere in the same fight, SS Sturmann Weber was cut down by Soviet infantry. Neff, wounded, handed over command to SS Untersturmführer Krischer and was sent to recover at the divisional hospital. On 17th and 18th September, counterattacks were launched again and again. The Tigers came under relentless artillery bombardment. On the 19th, the company struck back at Hill 103 with some success, but the next day, the Russians responded with overwhelming force and seized the hill permanently. The Tigers had to reposition under fire just to avoid encirclement. On the 20th of September, the company listed a strength of 114 men. By 1st October, it had grown slightly to 117, but 11 were either wounded or sick. There was little celebration in the gain, just another number. That October, the men began building bunkers near Legionowo, felling trees for roofing. Support units were stationed in Jablona. The combat section, tired, scarred, stubborn, remained forward in Josefov. On the 10th, the battle for Hill 101 erupted. The Tigers, alongside 2nd Battalion of Eiche Regiment, went into action west of Josefov. SS Sturmann Kautz, a cook pressed into duty, was killed that day. SS Rottenführer Koppen and tank commander SS Oberscharführer Wendt died in the same engagement. Their Tiger was struck and burned. SS Rottenführer Preisendanz was critically wounded and died 2 weeks later. Others were hit: Kübelwagen driver Karl Schade, support men Christian Schuard and Lloyd, both cooks. No one was safe anymore. The next day, on 11th October, SS Sturmbannführer Biermeier, former 9th Company commander, was seriously wounded while visiting a forward command post. 6 Tigers broke up a Russian assault near Michalov Grabina, but 4 of them came out badly damaged. On the 12th, Neff returned to the company, recovered and composed, and resumed command. Krischer was transferred to headquarters, though within weeks he fell ill with pneumonia and was hospitalized in Modlin. Eventually, he was sent to Sennelager and later Vienna for specialist care. From the 12th to the 13th of October, Russian artillery pounded the Totenkopf front line. 2 men from the maintenance section, SS Rottenführer Hodap and SS Sturmann Priess, were killed near Jablona. On the 14th, the Tigers joined the defense of Hill 97 and Lapigros. The pressure was relentless. The next day, Neff was promoted to SS Obersturmführer. It was a bitter honor. That same day, Tigers from 9th Company and Panthers from 1st Battalion engaged in fierce combat near Josefov. They knocked out 6 Russian tanks, 3 each. On the 16th of October, the Soviets halted their offensive. For the first time in weeks, the shelling ceased. Then, on the 19th, another thrust came. It was beaten back. On the 22nd, the regiment pulled together again, reforming in the area of Jablona and Legionowo. 9th Company regrouped too, with 13 Tigers still standing. Reinforcements trickled back in. Elements from SS Panzerjägerabteilung 3 rejoined the company. Other parts of the company, attached earlier to I Battalion, were finally brought back. It was cold. The nights were long, but for the moment they had breathing room. Then came December. On 24th December, the men of Totenkopf, including the crewmen of 9th Company, gathered in a schoolhouse to celebrate Christmas Eve. Candles flickered, some sang quietly. For a moment the war seemed far away. By 2200 hours they were back in their quarters. Lemkool turned on a radio, twisting the dial, searching for a broadcast through the static. That's when the door burst open. A comrade stood there, breathless, eyes wide. The division was being moved immediately. Transport was being readied. They were going to Hungary. The Christmas warmth vanished in an instant. That night, they packed everything: tools, uniforms, ammunition, radios. Every man stowed his personal kit inside the tanks. There was no ceremony, no farewell, just orders, steel, and silence. The next phase had begun.